One day Milo flew away to England to pick up a load of Turkish halva and came flying back from Madagascar leading 4 German bombers filled with yams, collards, mustard greens and black-eyed Georgia peas. Milo was dumbfounded when he stepped down to the ground and found a contingent of armed MPs waiting to imprison the German pilots and confiscate their planes. Confiscate. The mere word was anathema to him, and he stormed back and forth in excoriating condemnation, shaking a piercing finger of rebuke in the guilt-ridden faces of Colonel Cathcart, Colonel Corn and the poor battle-scarred captain with the submachine gun who commanded the MPs. Is this Russia? Milo assailed them incredulously at the top of his voice. Confiscate? He shrieked, as though he could not believe his own ears. Since when is it the policy of the American government to confiscate the private property of its citizens? Shame on you. Shame on all of you for even thinking such a horrible thought. But Milo, Major Danby interrupted timidly, we're at war with Germany, and those are German planes. They are no such thing. Milo retorted furiously. Those planes belong to the syndicate, and everybody has a share. Confiscate? How can you possibly confiscate your own private property? Confiscate, indeed. I've never heard anything so depraved in my whole life. And sure enough, Milo was right, for when they looked, his mechanics had painted out the German swastikas on the wings, tails and fuselages with double coats of flat white and stenciled in the words M&M Enterprises, fine fruits and produce. Right before their eyes he had transformed his syndicate into an international cartel. Milo's argosies of plenty now filled the air. Planes poured in from Norway, Denmark, France, Germany, Austria, Italy, Yugoslavia, Romania, Bulgaria, Sweden, Finland, Poland, from everywhere in Europe, in fact, but Russia, with whom Milo refused to do business. When everybody who was going to had signed up with M&M Enterprises, fine fruits, and produce, Milo created a wholly owned subsidiary, M&M Fancy Pastry, and obtained more airplanes and more money from the mess funds for scones and crumpets from the British Isles, prune and cheese Danish from Copenhagen, Claire's, cream puffs, Napoleons and petit fours from Paris, Reims, and Grenoble, Kugelhupf, Pumpernickel and Pfefferkuchen from Berlin, Linzer and Dobos Torten from Vienna, Strudel from Hungary and Baklava from Ankara. Each morning Milo sent planes aloft all over Europe and North Africa hauling long red tow signs advertising the day's specials in large square letters, I around, 79. Whiting, 21. He boosted cash income for the syndicate by leasing tow signs to Pet Milk, Gaines Dog Food, and Nox Zima. In a spirit of civic enterprise, he regularly allotted a certain amount of free aerial advertising space to General Peckham for the propagation of such messages in the public interest as neatness counts, haste makes waste, and the family that prays together stays together. Milo purchased spot radio announcements on Axis Sally's and Lord Haha's daily propaganda broadcasts from Berlin to keep things moving. Business boomed on every battlefront. Milo's planes were a familiar sight. They had freedom of passage everywhere, and one day Milo contracted with the American military authorities to bomb the German-held highway bridge at Orvieto and with the German military authorities to defend the highway bridge at Orvieto with anti-aircraft fire against his own attack. His fee for attacking the bridge for America was the total cost of the operation plus 6% and his fee from Germany for defending the bridge was the same cost plus 6 agreement augmented by a merit bonus of $1,000 for every American plane he shot down. The consummation of these deals represented an important victory for private enterprise, he pointed out, since the armies of both countries were socialized institutions. Once the contracts were signed, there seemed to be no point in using the resources of the syndicate to bomb and defend the bridge, inasmuch as both governments had ample men and material right there to do so and were perfectly happy to contribute them, and in the end Milo realized a fantastic profit from both halves of his project for doing nothing more than signing his name twice. The arrangements were fair to both sides. Since Milo did have freedom of passage everywhere, His planes were able to steal over in a sneak attack without alerting the German anti-aircraft gunners, and since Milo knew about the attack, he was able to alert the German anti-aircraft gunners in sufficient time for them to begin firing accurately the moment the planes came into range. It was an ideal arrangement for everyone but the dead man in Yossarian's tent, who was killed over the target the day he arrived. "I didn't kill him," Milo kept replying passionately to Yossarian's angry protest. "I wasn't even there that day, I tell you. Do you think I was down there on the ground firing an anti-aircraft gun when the planes came over? But you organized the whole thing, didn't you?" Yossarian shouted back at him in the velvet darkness cloaking the path leading past the still vehicles of the motor pool to the open-air movie theater. "And I didn't organize anything," Milo answered indignantly, drawing great agitated sniffs of air in through his hissing, pale, twitching nose. "The Germans have the bridge, and we were going to bomb it, whether I stepped into the picture or not. I just saw a wonderful opportunity to make some profit out of the mission, and I took it. What's so terrible about that? What's so terrible about it? Milo, a man in my tent was killed on that mission before he could even unpack his bags. But I didn't kill him. You got $1,000 extra for it. But I didn't kill him. I wasn't even there, I tell you. I was in Barcelona buying olive oil and skinless and boneless sardines, and I've got the purchase orders to prove it. And I didn't get the $1,000. That $1,000 went to the syndicate, and everybody got a share, even you." Milo was appealing to Yossarian from the bottom of his soul. "Look, I didn't start this war, Yossarian, no matter what that lousy Wintergreen is saying. I'm just trying to put it on a business-like basis. Is anything wrong with that? You know, $1,000 ain't such a bad price for a medium bomber and a crew. If I can persuade the Germans to pay me $1,000 for every plane they shoot down, why shouldn't I take it? Because you're dealing with the enemy, that's why. Can't you understand that we're fighting a war? People are dying. Look around you, for Christ's sake." Milo shook his head with weary forbearance. "The Germans are not our enemies," he declared. "Oh, I know what you're going to say. Sure, we're at war with them. But the Germans are also members in good standing of the syndicate, and it's my job to protect their rights as shareholders. Maybe they did start the war, and maybe they are killing millions of people, but they pay their bills a lot more promptly than some allies of ours I could name. Don't you understand that I have to respect the sanctity of my contract with Germany? Can't you see it from my point of view?" "No," Yossarian rebuffed him harshly. Milo was stung and made no effort to disguise his wounded feelings. It was a muggy, moonlit night filled with gnats, moths, and mosquitoes. Milo lifted his arm suddenly and pointed toward the open-air theater, where the milky, dust-filled beam bursting horizontally from the projector slashed a cone-like swath in the blackness and draped in a fluorescent membrane of light. The audience tilted on the seats there in hypnotic sags, their faces focused upward toward the illuminized movie screen. Milo's eyes were liquid with integrity, and his artless and uncorrupted face was lustrous with a shining mixture of sweat and insect repellent. "Look at them," he exclaimed in a voice choked with emotion. "They are my friends, my countrymen, my comrades in arms. A fellow never had a better bunch of buddies. Do you think I'd do a single thing to harm them if I didn't have to? Haven't I got enough on my mind? Can't you see how upset I am already about all that cotton piling up on those piers in Egypt?" Milo's voice splintered into fragments, and he clutched at Yossarian's shirt front as though drowning. His eyes were throbbing visibly like brown caterpillars. "Yossarian, what am I going to do with so much cotton? It's all your fault for letting me buy it. The cotton was piling up on the piers in Egypt, and nobody wanted any." Milo had never dreamed that the Nile Valley could be so fertile or that there would be no market at all for the crop he had bought. The mess halls in his syndicate would not help, they rose up in uncompromising rebellion against his proposal to tax them on a per capita basis in order to enable each man to own his own share of the Egyptian cotton crop. Even his reliable friends the Germans failed him in this crisis, They preferred ersatz. Milo's mess halls would not even help him store the cotton, and his warehousing costs skyrocketed and contributed to the devastating drain upon his cash reserves. The profits from the Orvieto mission were sucked away. He began writing home for the money he had sent back in better days. Soon that was almost gone. And new bales of cotton kept arriving on the wharves at Alexandria every day. Each time he succeeded in dumping some on the world market for a loss, it was snapped up by canny Egyptian brokers in the Levant, who sold it back to him at the original price, so that he was really worse off than before. M&M Enterprises verged on collapse. Milo cursed himself hourly for his monumental greed and stupidity in purchasing the entire Egyptian cotton crop, but a contract was a contract and had to be honored, and one night, after a sumptuous evening meal, all Milo's fighters and bombers took off, joined in formation directly overhead and began dropping bombs on the group. He had landed another contract with the Germans, this time to bomb his own outfit. Milo's planes separated in a well-coordinated attack and bombed the fuel stocks and the ordnance dump, the repair hangars and the B-25 bombers resting on the lollipop-shaped hardstands at the field. His crews spared the landing strip and the mess halls so that they could land safely when their work was done and enjoy a hot snack before retiring. They bombed with their landing lights on, since no one was shooting back. They bombed all 4 squadrons, the officers' club and the group headquarters building. Men bolted from their tents in sheer terror and did not know in which direction to turn. Wounded soon lay screaming everywhere. A cluster of fragmentation bombs exploded in the yard of the officers' club and punched jagged holes in the side of the wooden building and in the bellies and backs of a row of lieutenants and captains standing at the bar. They doubled over in agony and dropped. The rest of the officers fled toward the 2 exits in panic and jammed up the doorways like a dense, howling dam of human flesh as they shrank from going farther. Colonel Cathcart clawed and elbowed his way through the unruly, bewildered mass until he stood outside by himself. He stared up at the sky in stark astonishment and horror. Milo's planes, ballooning serenely in over the blossoming treetops with their Bombay doors open and wing flaps down and with their monstrous, bug-eyed, blinding, fiercely flickering, eerie landing lights on, were the most apocalyptic sight he had ever beheld. Colonel Cathcart let go a stricken gasp of dismay and hurled himself headlong into his jeep, almost sobbing. He found the gas pedal and the ignition and sped toward the airfield as fast as the rocking car would carry him, his huge flabby hands clenched and bloodless on the wheel or blaring his horn tormentedly. Once he almost killed himself when he swerved with a banshee screech of tires to avoid plowing into a bunch of men running crazily toward the hills in their underwear with their stunned faces down and their thin arms pressed high around their temples as puny shields. Yellow, orange and red fires were burning on both sides of the road. Tents and trees were in flames, and Milo's planes kept coming around interminably with their blinking white landing lights on and their Bombay doors open. Colonel Cathcart almost turned the jeep over when he slammed the brakes on at the control tower. He leaped from the car while it was still skidding dangerously and hurtled up the flight of steps inside, where 3 men were busy at the instruments and the controls. He bowled 2 of them aside in his lunge for the nickel-plated microphone, his eyes glittering wildly and his beefy face contorted with stress. He squeezed the microphone in a bestial grip and began shouting hysterically at the top of his voice. "Milo, you son of a bitch. Are you crazy? What the hell are you doing? Come down. Come down. Stop hollering so much, will you?" answered Milo, who was standing there right beside him in the control tower with a microphone of his own. "I'm right here." Milo looked at him with reproof and turned back to his work. "Very good, men, very good," he chanted into his microphone. "But I see one supply shed still standing. That will never do, Purvis. I've spoken to you about that kind of shoddy work before. Now, you go right back there this minute and try it again. And this time come in slowly. Slowly. Haste makes waste, Purvis. Haste makes waste. If I've told you that once, I must have told you that 100 times. Haste makes waste. The loudspeaker overhead began squawking. Milo, this is Alvin Brown. I've finished dropping my bombs. What should I do now? Strafe, said Milo. Strafe? Alvin Brown was shocked. We have no choice, Milo informed him resignedly. It's in the contract. Oh, okay, then, Alvin Brown acquiesced. In that case I'll strafe. This time Milo had gone too far. Bombing his own men and planes was more than even the most phlegmatic observer could stomach, and it looked like the end for him. High-ranking government officials poured in to investigate. Newspapers inveighed against Milo with glaring headlines, and congressmen denounced the atrocity in stentorian wrath and clamored for punishment. Mothers with children in the service organized into militant groups and demanded revenge. Not one voice was raised in his defense. Decent people everywhere were affronted, and Milo was all washed up until he opened his books to the public and disclosed the tremendous profit he had made. He could reimburse the government for all the people and property he had destroyed and still have enough money left over to continue buying Egyptian cotton. Everybody, of course, owned a share. And the sweetest part of the whole deal was that there really was no need to reimburse the government at all. In a democracy, the government is the people, Milo explained. We're people, aren't we? So we might just as well keep the money and eliminate the middleman. Frankly, I'd like to see the government get out of war altogether and leave the whole field to private industry. If we pay the government everything we owe it, we'll only be encouraging government control and discouraging other individuals from bombing their own men and planes. We'll be taking away their incentive. Milo was correct, of course, as everyone soon agreed, but a few embittered misfits like Doc Danica, who sulked cantankerously and muttered offensive insinuations about the morality of the whole venture until Milo mollified him with a donation, in the name of the syndicate, of a lightweight aluminum collapsible garden chair that Doc Danica could fold up conveniently and carry outside his tent each time Chief Whitehafoot came inside his tent and carry back inside his tent each time Chief Whitehafoot came out. Doc Danica had lost his head during Milo's bombardment. Instead of running for cover, he had remained out in the open and performed his duty, slithering along the ground through shrapnel, strafing and incendiary bombs like a furtive, wily lizard from casualty to casualty, administering tourniquets, morphine, splints and sulfanilamide with a dark and doleful visage, never saying one word more than he had to and reading in each man's bluing wound a dreadful portent of his own decay. He worked himself relentlessly into exhaustion before the long night was over and came down with a sniff the next day that sent him hurrying querulously into the medical tent to have his temperature taken by Gus and Wes and to obtain a mustard plaster and vaporizer. Doc Danica tended each moaning man that night with the same glum and profound and introverted grief he showed at the airfield the day of the Avignon mission when Yossarian climbed down the few steps of his plane naked, in a state of utter shock, with Snowden smeared abundantly all over his bare heels and toes, knees, arms and fingers, and pointed inside wordlessly toward where the young radio gunner lay freezing to death on the floor beside the still younger tail gunner who kept falling back into a dead faint each time he opened his eyes and saw Snowden dying. Doc Danica draped a blanket around Yossarian's shoulders almost tenderly after Snowden had been removed from the plane and carried into an ambulance on a stretcher. He led Yossarian toward his jeep. Mquat helped, and the three drove in silence to the squadron medical tent, where Mquat and Doc Danica guided Yossarian inside to a chair and washed Snowden off him with cold wet balls of absorbent cotton. Doc Danica gave him a pill and a shot that put him to sleep for 12 hours. When Yossarian woke up and went to see him, Doc Danica gave him another pill and a shot that put him to sleep for another 12 hours. When Yossarian woke up again and went to see him, Doc Danica made ready to give him another pill and a shot. "How long are you going to keep giving me those pills and shots?" Yossarian asked him. "Until you feel better. I feel all right now." Doc Danica's frail suntanned forehead furrowed with surprise. "Then why don't you put some clothes on? Why are you walking around naked?" I don't want to wear a uniform anymore. Danica accepted the explanation and put away his hypodermic syringe. Are you sure you feel all right? I feel fine. I'm just a little logy from all those pills and shots you've been giving me. Yossarian went about his business with no clothes on all the rest of that day and was still naked late the next morning when Milo, after hunting everywhere else, finally found him sitting up a tree a small distance in back of the quaint little military cemetery at which Snowden was being buried. Milo was dressed in his customary business attire, olive drab trousers, a fresh olive drab shirt and tie, with one silver first lieutenant spar gleaming on the collar, and a regulation dress cap with a stiff leather bill. I've been looking all over for you, Milo called up to Yossarian from the ground reproachfully. You should have looked for me in this tree, Yossarian answered. I've been up here all morning. Come on down and taste this and tell me if it's good. It's very important. Yossarian shook his head. He sat nude on the lowest limb of the tree and balanced himself with both hands grasping the bough directly above. He refused to budge, and Milo had no choice but to stretch both arms about the trunk in a distasteful hug and start climbing. He struggled upward clumsily with loud grunts and wheezes, and his clothes were squashed and crooked by the time he pulled himself up high enough to hook a leg over the limb and pause for breath. His dress cap was askew and in danger of falling. Milo caught it just in time when it began slipping. Globules of perspiration glistened like transparent pearls around his mustache and swelled like opaque blisters under his eyes. Yossarian watched him impassively. Cautiously Milo worked himself around in a half circle so that he could face Yossarian. He unwrapped tissue paper from something soft, round and brown and handed it to Yossarian. Please taste this and let me know what you think. I'd like to serve it to the men. What is it? Asked Yossarian, and took a big bite. Chocolate-covered cotton. Yossarian gagged convulsively and sprayed his big mouthful of chocolate-covered cotton right into Milo's face. Here, take it back. He spouted angrily. Jesus Christ. Have you gone crazy? You didn't even take the goddamn seeds out. Give it a chance, will you? Milo begged. It can't be that bad. Is it really that bad? It's even worse. But I've got to make the mess halls feed it to the men. They'll never be able to swallow it. They've got to swallow it, Milo ordained with dictatorial grandeur, and almost broke his neck when he let go with one arm to wave a righteous finger in the air. Come on out here, Yossarian invited him. You'll be much safer, and you can see everything. Gripping the bough above with both hands, Milo began inching his way out on the limb sideways with utmost care and apprehension. His face was rigid with tension, and he sighed with relief when he found himself seated securely beside Yossarian. He stroked the tree affectionately. This is a pretty good tree, he observed admiringly with proprietary gratitude. It's the tree of life, Yossarian answered, waggling his toes, and of knowledge of good and evil, too. Milo squinted closely at the bark and branches. No it isn't, he replied. It's a chestnut tree. I ought to know. I sell chestnuts. Have it your way. They sat in the tree without talking for several seconds, their legs dangling and their hands almost straight up on the bough above, the one completely nude but for a pair of crepe-soled sandals, the other completely dressed in a coarse olive drab woolen uniform with his tie knotted tight. Milo studied Yossarian diffidently through the corner of his eye, hesitating tactfully. I want to ask you something, he said at last. You don't have any clothes on. I don't want to butt in or anything, but I just want to know. Why aren't you wearing your uniform? I don't want to. Milo nodded rapidly like a sparrow pecking. I see, he stated quickly with a look of vivid confusion. I understand perfectly. I heard Appleby and Captain Black say you had gone crazy, and I just wanted to find out. He hesitated politely again, weighing his next question. Aren't you ever going to put your uniform on again? I don't think so. Milo nodded with spurious vim to indicate he still understood and then sat silent, ruminating gravely with troubled misgiving. A scarlet-crested bird shot by below, brushing short dark wings against a quivering bush. Yossarian and Milo were covered in their bower by tissue-thin tiers of sloping green and largely surrounded by other great chestnut trees and a silver spruce. The sun was high overhead in a vast sapphire blue sky beaded with low, isolated, puffy clouds of dry and immaculate white. There was no breeze, and the leaves about them hung motionless. The shade was feathery. Everything was at peace but Milo, who straightened suddenly with a muffled cry and began pointing excitedly. "Look at that!" he exclaimed in alarm. "Look at that! That's a funeral going on down there. That looks like the cemetery. Isn't it?" Yossarian answered him slowly in a level voice. "They're burying that kid who got killed in my plane over Avignon the other day." "Snowden? What happened to him?" Milo asked in a voice deadened with awe. "He got killed. That's terrible," Milo grieved, and his large brown eyes filled with tears. "That poor kid. It really is terrible." He bit his trembling lip hard, and his voice rose with emotion when he continued. "And it will get even worse if the mess halls don't agree to buy my cotton." "Yossarian, what's the matter with them? Don't they realize it's their syndicate? Don't they know they've all got a share? Did the dead man in my tent have a share?" Yossarian demanded caustically. "Of course he did," Milo assured him lavishly. "Everybody in the squadron has a share. He was killed before he even got into the squadron." Milo made a deft grimace of tribulation and turned away. "I wish you'd stop picking on me about that dead man in your tent," he pleaded peevishly. "I told you I didn't have anything to do with killing him. Is it my fault that I saw this great opportunity to corner the market on Egyptian cotton and got us into all this trouble? Was I supposed to know there was going to be a glut? I didn't even know what a glut was in those days. An opportunity to corner a market doesn't come along very often, and I was pretty shrewd to grab the chance when I had it." Milo gulped back a moan as he saw 6 uniform. He scooted away with his body doubled over and his face contorted intentionally into a nonchalant, sociable smile in case anyone chanced to see him. He abandoned the ditch for the forest the moment he saw someone coming toward him from the opposite direction and ran through the cluttered forest frenziedly like someone pursued, his cheeks burning with disgrace. He heard loud, wild peals of derisive laughter crashing all about him and caught blurred glimpses of wicked, beery faces smirking far back inside the bushes and high overhead in the foliage of the trees. Spasms of scorching pain stabbed through his lungs and slowed him to a crippled walk. He lunged and staggered onward until he could go no farther and collapsed all at once against a gnarled apple tree, banging his head hard against the trunk as he toppled forward and holding on with both arms to keep from falling. His breathing was a rasping, moaning din in his ears. Minutes passed like hours before he finally recognized himself as the source of the turbulent roar that was overwhelming him. The pains in his chest abated. Soon he felt strong enough to stand. He cocked his ears craftily. The forest was quiet. There was no demonic laughter, no one was chasing him. He was too tired and sad and dirty to feel relieved. He straightened his disheveled clothing with fingers that were numb and shaking and walked the rest of the way to the clearing with rigid self-control. The chaplain brooded often about the danger of heart attack. Corporal Whitcomb's jeep was still parked in the clearing. The chaplain tiptoed stealthily around the back of Corporal Whitcomb's tent rather than pass the entrance and risk being seen and insulted by him. Heaving a grateful sigh, he slipped quickly inside his own tent and found Corporal Whitcomb ensconced on his cot, his knees propped up. Corporal Whitcomb's mud-caked shoes were on the chaplain's blanket, and he was eating one of the chaplain's candy bars as he thumbed with sneering expression through one of the chaplain's Bibles. "Where've you been?" he demanded rudely and disinterestedly, without looking up. The chaplain colored and turned away evasively. "I went for a walk through the woods." "All right," Corporal Whitcomb snapped. "Don't take me into your confidence. But just wait and see what happens to my morale." He bit into the chaplain's candy bar hungrily and continued with a full mouth. "You had a visitor while you were gone. Major. The chaplain spun around with surprise and cried, Major was here?" That's who we're talking about, isn't it? Where did he go? He jumped down into that railroad ditch and took off like a frightened rabbit. Corporal Whitcomb snickered. What a jerk. Did he say what he wanted? He said he needed your help in a matter of great importance. The chaplain was astounded. Major said that? He didn't say that, Corporal Whitcomb corrected with withering precision. He wrote it down in a sealed personal letter he left on your desk. The chaplain glanced at the bridge table that served as his desk and saw only the abominable orange-red pear-shaped plum tomato he had obtained that same morning from Colonel Cathcart, still lying on its side where he had forgotten it like an indestructible and incombatant symbol of his own ineptitude. Where is the letter? I threw it away as soon as I tore it open and read it. Corporal Whitcomb slammed the Bible shut and jumped up. What's the matter? Won't you take my word for it? He walked out. He walked right back in and almost collided with the chaplain, who was rushing out behind him on his way back to Major. You don't know how to delegate responsibility, Corporal Whitcomb informed him sullenly. That's another one of the things that's wrong with you. The chaplain nodded penitently and hurried past, unable to make himself take the time to apologize. He could feel the skillful hand of fate motivating him imperatively. Twice that day already, he realized now, Major had come racing toward him inside the ditch, and twice that day the chaplain had stupidly postponed the destined meeting by bolting into the forest. He seethed with self-recrimination as he hastened back as rapidly as he could stride along the splintered, irregularly spaced railroad ties. Bits of grit and gravel inside his shoes and socks were grinding the tops of his toes raw. His pale, laboring face was screwed up unconsciously into a grimace of acute discomfort. The early August afternoon was growing hotter and more humid. It was almost a mile from his tent to Yossarian's squadron. The chaplain's summer tan shirt was soaking with perspiration by the time he arrived there and rushed breathlessly back inside the orderly room tent, where he was halted peremptorily by the same treacherous, soft-spoken staff sergeant with round eyeglasses and gaunt cheeks, who requested him to remain outside because Major was inside and told him he would not be allowed inside until Major went out. The chaplain looked at him in an uncomprehending daze. Why did the sergeant hate him? He wondered. His lips were white and trembling. He was aching with thirst. What was the matter with people? Wasn't there tragedy enough? The sergeant put his hand out and held the chaplain steady. I'm sorry, sir, he said regretfully in a low, courteous, melancholy voice. But those are Major's orders. He never wants to see anyone. He wants to see me, the chaplain pleaded. He came to my tent to see me while I was here before. Major did that? The sergeant asked. Yes, he did. Please go in and ask him. I'm afraid I can't go in, sir. He never wants to see me either. Perhaps if you left a note. I don't want to leave a note. Doesn't he ever make an exception? Only in extreme circumstances. The last time he left his tent was to attend the funeral of one of the enlisted men. The last time he saw anyone in his office was a time he was forced to. A bombardier named Yossarian forced. Yossarian? The chaplain lit up with excitement at this new coincidence. Was this another miracle in the making? But that's exactly whom I want to speak to him about. Did they talk about the number of missions Yossarian has to fly? Yes, sir, that's exactly what they did talk about. Captain Yossarian had flown 51 missions, and he appealed to Major to ground him so that he wouldn't have to fly 4 more. Colonel Cathcart wanted only 55 missions then. And what did Major say? Major told him there was nothing he could do. The chaplain's face fell. Major said that? Yes, sir. In fact, he advised Yossarian to go see you for help. Are you certain you wouldn't like to leave a note, sir? I have a pencil and paper right here. The chaplain shook his head, chewing his clotted dry lower lip forlornly, and walked out. It was still so early in the day, and so much had already happened. The air was cooler in the forest. His throat was parched and sore. He walked slowly and asked himself ruefully what new misfortune could possibly befall him a moment before the mad hermit in the woods leaped out at him without warning from behind a mulberry bush. The chaplain screamed at the top of his voice. The tall, cadaverous stranger fell back in fright at the chaplain's cry and shrieked, "Don't hurt me!" "Who are you?" the chaplain shouted. "Please don't hurt me!" The man shouted back. "I'm the chaplain." "Then why do you want to hurt me?" "I don't want to hurt you." The chaplain insisted with a rising hint of exasperation, even though he was still routed to the spot. "Just tell me who you are and what you want from me." "I just want to find out if Chief White Half-Oat died of pneumonia yet," the man shouted back. "That's all I want. I live here. My name is Flume. I belong to the squadron, but I live here in the woods. You can ask anyone." The chaplain's composure began trickling back as he studied the queer, cringing figure intently. A pair of captain's bars ulcerated with rust hung on the man's ragged shirt collar. He had a hairy, tar-black mole on the underside of one nostril and a heavy rough mustache the color of poplar bark. "Why do you live in the woods if you belong to the squadron?" the chaplain inquired curiously. "I have to live in the woods," the captain replied crabbily, as though the chaplain ought to know. He straightened slowly, still watching the chaplain guardedly although he towered above him by more than a full head. "Don't you hear everybody talking about me? Chief White Half-Oat swore he was going to cut my throat some night when I was fast asleep, and I don't dare lie down in the squadron while he's still alive." The chaplain listened to the implausible explanation distrustfully. "But that's incredible," he replied. "That would be premeditated murder. Why didn't you report the incident to Major?" "I did report the incident to Major," said the captain sadly, "and Major said he would cut my throat if I ever spoke to him again." The man studied the chaplain fearfully. "Are you going to cut my throat, too?" "Oh, no, the chaplain assured him. "Of course not. Do you really live in the forest?" The captain nodded, and the chaplain gazed at his porous gray pallor of fatigue and malnutrition with a mixture of pity and esteem. The man's body was a bony shell inside rumpled clothing that hung on him like a disorderly collection of sacks. Wisps of dried grass were glued all over him. He needed a haircut badly. There were great, dark circles under his eyes. The chaplain was moved almost to tears by the harassed, bedraggled picture the captain presented, and he filled with deference and compassion at the thought of the many severe rigors the poor man had to endure daily. In a voice hushed with humility, he said, "Who does your laundry?" The captain pursed his lips in a businesslike manner. "I have it done by a washerwoman in one of the farmhouses down the road. I keep my things in my trailer and sneak inside once or twice a day for a clean handkerchief or a change of underwear." "What will you do when winter comes?" "Oh, I expect to be back in the squadron by then," the captain answered with a kind of martyred confidence. "Chief White Half-Oat kept promising everyone that he was going to die of pneumonia, and I guess I'll have to be patient until the weather turns a little colder and damper." He scrutinized the chaplain perplexedly. "Don't you know all this? Don't you hear all the fellows talking about me? I don't think I've ever heard anyone mention you." "Well, I certainly can't understand that." The captain was piqued, but managed to carry on with a pretense of optimism. "Well, here it is almost September already, so I guess it won't be too long now. The next time any of the boys ask about me, why, just tell them I'll be back grinding out those old publicity releases again as soon as Chief White Half-Oat dies of pneumonia. Will you tell them that? Say I'll be back in the squadron as soon as winter comes and Chief Half-Oat dies of pneumonia. Okay?" The chaplain memorized the prophetic words solemnly, entranced further by their esoteric import. "Do you live on berries, herbs and roots?" he asked. "No, of course not," the captain replied with surprise. "I sneak into the mess hall through the back and eat in the kitchen. Milo gives me sandwiches and milk." "What do you do when it rains?" the captain answered frankly. "I get wet." "Where do you sleep?" Swiftly the captain ducked down into a crouch and began backing away. "You too?" he cried frantically. "Oh, no," cried the chaplain. "I swear to you. You do want to cut my throat?" The captain insisted. "I give my word," the chaplain pleaded, but it was too late, for the homely hirsute spectre had already vanished, dissolving so expertly inside the blooming, dappled, fragmented malformations of leaves, light and shadows that the chaplain was already doubting that he had even been there. So many monstrous events were occurring that he was no longer positive which events were monstrous and which were really taking place. He wanted to find out about the madman in the woods as quickly as possible, to check if there ever really had been a Captain Flume, but his first chore, he recalled with reluctance, was to appease Corporal Whitcomb for neglecting to delegate enough responsibility to him. He plodded along the zigzagging path through the forest listlessly, clogged with thirst and feeling almost too exhausted to go on. He was remorseful when he thought of Corporal Whitcomb. He prayed that Corporal Whitcomb would be gone when he reached the clearing so that he could undress without embarrassment, wash his arms and chest and shoulders thoroughly, drink water, lie down refreshed and perhaps even sleep for a few minutes, but he was in for still another disappointment and still another shock, for Corporal Whitcomb was Sergeant Whitcomb by the time he arrived and was sitting with his shirt off in the chaplain's chair sewing his new sergeant's stripes on his sleeve with a chaplain's needle and thread. Corporal Whitcomb had been promoted by Colonel Cathcart, who wanted to see the chaplain at once about the letters. "Oh, no," groaned the chaplain, sinking down dumbfounded on his cot. His warm canteen was empty, and he was too distraught to remember the Lister bag hanging outside in the shade between the two tents. "I can't believe it. I just can't believe that anyone would seriously believe that I've been forging Washington Irving's name." "Not those letters," Corporal Whitcomb corrected, plainly enjoying the chaplain's chagrin. "He wants to see you about the letters home to the families of casualties." "Those letters?" asked the chaplain with surprise. "That's right," Corporal Whitcomb gloated. "He's really going to chew you out for refusing to let me send them. You should have seen him go for the idea once I reminded him the letters could carry his signature. That's why he promoted me. He's absolutely sure they'll get him into the Saturday Evening Post." The chaplain's befuddlement increased. "But how did he know we were even considering the idea?" "I went to his office and told him." "You did what?" the chaplain demanded shrilly, and charged to his feet in an unfamiliar rage. "Do you mean to say that you actually went over my head to the colonel without asking my permission?" Corporal Whitcomb grinned brazenly with scornful satisfaction. "That's right, chaplain," he answered. "And you better not try to do anything about it if you know what's good for you." He laughed quietly in malicious defiance. "Colonel Cathcart isn't going to like it if he finds out you're getting even with me for bringing him my idea. You know something, chaplain?" Corporal Whitcomb continued, biting the chaplain's black thread apart contemptuously with a loud snap and buttoning on his shirt. "That dumb bastard really thinks it's one of the greatest ideas he's ever heard. It might even get me into the Saturday Evening Post," Colonel Cathcart boasted in his office with a smile, swaggering back and forth convivially as he reproached the chaplain. "And you didn't have brains enough to appreciate it. You've got a good man in Corporal Whitcomb, chaplain. I hope you have brains enough to appreciate that." "Sergeant Whitcomb," the chaplain corrected, before he could control himself. Colonel Cathcart roared. "I said Sergeant Whitcomb," he replied. "I wish you'd try listening once in a while instead of always finding fault. You don't want to be a captain all your life, do you?" "Sir? Well, I certainly don't see how you're ever going to amount to anything else if you keep on this way. Corporal Whitcomb feels that you fellows haven't had a fresh idea in 1944 years, and I'm inclined to agree with him. A bright boy, that Corporal Whitcomb. Well, it's all going to change." Colonel Cathcart sat down at his desk with a determined air and cleared a large neat space in his blotter. When he had finished, he tapped his finger inside it. "Starting tomorrow," he said, "I want you and Corporal Whitcomb to write a letter of condolence for me to the next of kin of every man in the group who's killed, wounded or taken prisoner. I want those letters to be sincere letters. I want them filled up with lots of personal details so there'll be no doubt I mean every word you say. Is that clear?" The chaplain stepped forward impulsively to remonstrate. "But, sir, that's impossible," he blurted out. "We don't even know all the men that well. What difference does that make?" Colonel Cathcart demanded, and then smiled amicably. "Corporal Whitcomb brought me this basic form letter that takes care of just about every situation. Listen, dear Mrs., Mr., Miss, or Mr. and Mrs. Words cannot express the deep personal grief I experienced when your husband, son, father or brother was killed, wounded or reported missing in action." And so on. I think that opening sentence sums up my sentiments exactly. Listen, maybe you'd better let Corporal Whitcomb take charge of the whole thing if you don't feel up to it. Colonel Cathcart whipped out his cigarette holder and flexed it between both hands like an onyx and ivory riding crop. "That's one of the things that's wrong with you, chaplain. Corporal Whitcomb tells me you don't know how to delegate responsibility. He says you've got no initiative either. You're not going to disagree with me, are you?" "No, sir." The chaplain shook his head, feeling despicably remiss because he did not know how to delegate responsibility and had no initiative, and because he really had been tempted to disagree with the colonel. His mind was a shambles. They were shooting skeet outside, and every time a gun was fired his senses were jarred. He could not adjust to the sound of the shots. He was surrounded by bushels of plum tomatoes and was almost convinced that he had stood in Colonel Cathcart's office on some similar occasion deep in the past and had been surrounded by those same bushels of those same plum tomatoes. DJ. Vu again. The setting seemed so familiar, yet it also seemed so distant. His clothes felt grimy and old, and he was deathly afraid he smelled. "You take things too seriously, chaplain," Colonel Cathcart told him bluntly with an air of adult objectivity. "That's another one of the things that's wrong with you. That long face of yours gets everybody depressed. Let me see you laugh once in a while. Come on, chaplain. You give me a belly laugh now and I'll give you a whole bushel of plum tomatoes." He waited a second or two, watching, and then chortled victoriously. "You see, chaplain, I'm right. You can't give me a belly laugh, can you?" "No, sir," admitted the chaplain meekly, swallowing slowly with a visible effort. "Not right now. I'm very thirsty." "Then get yourself a drink. Colonel Corn keeps some bourbon in his desk. You ought to try dropping around the officers' club with us some evening just to have yourself a little fun. Try getting lit once in a while. I hope you don't feel you're better than the rest of us just because you're a professional man." "Oh, no, sir," the chaplain assured him with embarrassment. "As a matter of fact, I have been going to the officers' club the past few evenings. You're only a captain, you know," Colonel Cathcart continued, paying no attention to the chaplain's remark. "You may be a professional man, but you're still only a captain." "Yes, sir. I know." "That's fine, then. It's just as well you didn't laugh before. I wouldn't have given you the plum tomatoes anyway. Corporal Whitcomb tells me you took a plum tomato when you were in here this morning." "This morning? But, sir, you gave it to me." Colonel Cathcart cocked his head with suspicion. "I didn't say I didn't give it to you, did I? I merely said you took it. I don't see why you've got such a guilty conscience if you really didn't steal it. Did I give it to you?" "Yes, sir." "I swear you did." "Then I'll just have to take your word for it. Although I can't imagine why I'd want to give you a plum tomato." Colonel Cathcart transferred a round glass paperweight competently from the right edge of his desk to the left edge and picked up a sharpened pencil. "Okay. Chaplain, I've got a lot of important work to do now if you're through. You let me know when Corporal Whitcomb has sent out about a dozen of those letters and we'll get in touch with the editors of the Saturday Evening Post." A sudden inspiration made his face brighten. "Say, I think I'll volunteer the group for Avignon again. That should speed things up." "For Avignon?" The chaplain's heart missed a beat, and all his flesh began to prickle and creep. "That's right, the colonel explained exuberantly. "The sooner we get some casualties, the sooner we can make some progress on this. I'd like to get in the Christmas issue if we can. I imagine the circulation is higher then." And to the chaplain's horror, the colonel lifted the phone to volunteer the group for Avignon and tried to kick him out of the officers' club again that very same night, a moment before Yossarian rose up drunkenly, knocking over his chair, to start an avenging punch that made Nately call out his name and made Colonel Cathcart blanch and retreat prudently smack into General Dreedle, who shoved him off his bruised foot disgustedly and ordered him forward to kick the chaplain right back into the officers' club. It was all very upsetting to Colonel Cathcart, first the dreaded name Yossarian, tolling out again clearly like a warning of doom, and then General Dreedle's bruised foot, and that was another fault Colonel Cathcart found in the chaplain, the fact that it was impossible to predict how General Dreedle would react each time he saw him. Colonel Cathcart would never forget the first evening General Dreedle took notice of the chaplain in the officers' club, lifting his ruddy, sweltering, intoxicated face to stare ponderously through the yellow pall of cigarette smoke at the chaplain lurking near the wall by himself. "Well, I'll be damned," General Dreedle had exclaimed hoarsely, his shaggy grey menacing eyebrows beetling in recognition. "Is that a chaplain I see over there? That's really a fine thing when a man of God begins hanging around a place like this with a bunch of dirty drunks and gamblers." Colonel Cathcart compressed his lips grimly and started to rise. "I couldn't agree with you more, sir," he assented briskly in a tone of ostentatious disapproval. "I just don't know what's happening to the clergy these days. They are getting better, that's what's happening to them," General Dreedle growled emphatically. Colonel Cathcart gulped awkwardly and made a nimble recovery. "Yes, sir. They are getting better. That's exactly what I had in mind, sir. This is just the place for a chaplain to be, mingling with the men while they're out drinking and gambling so he can get to understand them and win their confidence. How the hell else is he ever going to get them to believe in God? That's exactly what I had in mind, sir, when I ordered him to come here," Colonel Cathcart said carefully, and threw his arm familiarly around the chaplain's shoulders as he walked him off into a corner to order him in a cold undertone to start reporting for duty at the officers' club every evening to mingle with the men while they were drinking and gambling so that he could get to understand them and win their confidence. The chaplain agreed and did report for duty to the officers' club every night to mingle with men who wanted to avoid him. Until the evening the vicious fist fight broke out at the ping-pong table and Chief White half-out whirled without provocation and punched Colonel Moodis squarely in the nose, knocking Colonel Moodis down on the seat of his pants and making General Dreedle roar with lusty, unexpected laughter until he spied the chaplain standing close by gawking at him grotesquely in tortured wonder. General Dreedle froze at the sight of him. He glowered at the chaplain with swollen fury for a moment, his good humor gone, and turned back toward the bar disgruntledly, rolling from side to side like a sailor on his short bandy legs. Colonel Cathcart cantered fearfully along behind, glancing anxiously about in vain for some sign of help from Colonel Corn. "That's a fine thing," General Dreedle growled at the bar, gripping his empty shot glass in his burly hand. "That's really a fine thing, when a man of God begins hanging around a place like this with a bunch of dirty drunks and gamblers." Colonel Cathcart sighed with relief. "Yes, sir," he exclaimed proudly. "It certainly is a fine thing. Then why the hell don't you do something about it, sir?" Colonel Cathcart inquired, blinking. "Do you think it does you credit to have your chaplain hanging around here every night? He's in here every goddamn time I come." "You are right, sir, absolutely right," Colonel Cathcart responded. "It does me no credit at all. And I am going to do something about it, this very minute. Aren't you the one who ordered him to come here?" "No, sir, that was Colonel Corn. I intend to punish him severely, too. If he wasn't a chaplain," General Dreedle muttered, "I'd have him taken outside and shot." "He's not a chaplain, sir," Colonel Cathcart advised helpfully. "Isn't he? Then why the hell does he wear that cross on his collar if he's not a chaplain?" "He doesn't wear a cross on his collar, sir. He wears a silver leaf. He's a lieutenant colonel." "You've got a chaplain who's a lieutenant colonel?" inquired General Dreedle with amazement. "Oh, no, sir. My chaplain is only a captain." "Then why the hell does he wear a silver leaf on his collar if he's only a captain?" "He doesn't wear a silver leaf on his collar, sir. He wears a cross." "Go away from me now, you son of a bitch," said General Dreedle. "Or I'll have you taken outside and shot." "Yes, sir." Colonel Cathcart went away from General Dreedle with a gulp and kicked the chaplain out of the officers' club, and it was exactly the way it almost was 2 months later after the chaplain had tried to persuade Colonel Cathcart to rescind his order increasing the number of missions to 60 and had failed abysmally in that endeavor too, and the chaplain was ready now to capitulate to despair entirely but was restrained by the memory of his wife, whom he loved and missed so pathetically with such sensual and exalted ardor, and by the lifelong trust he had placed in the wisdom and justice of an immortal, omnipotent, omniscient, humane, universal, anthropomorphic, English-speaking, Anglo-Saxon, pro-American God, which had begun to waver. So many things were testing his faith. There was the Bible, of course, but the Bible was a book, and so were Bleak House, Treasure Island, Ethan Frome and the Last of the Mohicans. Did it then seem probable, as he had once overheard Dunbar ask, that the answers to the riddles of creation would be supplied by people too ignorant to understand the mechanics of rainfall? Had Almighty God, in all his infinite wisdom, really been afraid that men 6,000 years ago would succeed in building a tower to heaven? Where the devil was heaven? Was it up? Down? There was no up or down in a finite but expanding universe in which even the vast, burning, dazzling, majestic sun was in a state of progressive decay that would eventually destroy the earth too. There were no miracles, prayers went unanswered, and misfortune tramped with equal brutality on the virtuous and the corrupt, and the chaplain, who had conscience and character, would have yielded to reason and relinquished his belief in the God of his fathers, would truly have resigned both his calling and his commission and taken his chances as a private in the infantry or field artillery, or even, perhaps, as a corporal in the paratroopers, had it not been for such successive mystic phenomena as the naked man in the tree at that poor sergeant's funeral weeks before and the cryptic, haunting, encouraging promise of the prophet Flume in the forest only that afternoon, "Tell them I'll be back when winter comes." 26 Arfi. In a way it was all Yossarian's fault, for if he had not moved the bomb line during the big siege of Bologna, Major de Coverley might still be around to save him, and if he had not stocked the enlisted men's apartment with girls who had no other place to live, Nately might never have fallen in love with his whore as she sat naked from the waist down in the room full of grumpy blackjack players who ignored her. Nately stared at her covertly from his overstuffed yellow armchair, marveling at the bored, phlegmatic strength with which she accepted the mass rejection. She yawned, and he was deeply moved. He had never witnessed such heroic poise before. The girl had climbed 5 steep flights of stairs to sell herself to the group of satiated enlisted men, who had girls living there all around them. None wanted her at any price, not even after she had stripped without real enthusiasm to tempt them with a tall body that was firm and full and truly voluptuous. She seemed more fatigued than disappointed. Now she sat resting in vacuous indolence, watching the card game with dull curiosity as she gathered her recalcitrant energies for the tedious chore of donning the rest of her clothing and going back to work. In a little while she stirred. A little while later she rose with an unconscious sigh and stepped lethargically into her tight cotton panties and dark skirt, then buckled on her shoes and left. Nately slipped out behind her, and when Yossarian and Arfi entered the officer's apartment almost 2 hours later, there she was again, stepping into her panties and skirt, and it was almost like the chaplain's recurring sensation of having been through a situation before, except for Nately, who was moping inconsolably with his hands in his pockets. "She wants to go now," he said in a faint, strange voice. "She doesn't want to stay. Why don't you just pay her some money to let you spend the rest of the day with her?" Yossarian advised. "She gave me my money back," Nately admitted. She's tired of me now and wants to go looking for someone else. The girl paused when her shoes were on to glance in surly invitation at Yossarian and Arfi. Her breasts were pointy and large in a thin white sleeveless sweater she wore that squeezed each contour and flowed outward smoothly with the tops of her enticing hips. Yossarian returned her gaze and was strongly attracted. He shook his head. "Good riddance to bad rubbish," was Arfi's unperturbed response. "Don't say that about her." Nately protested with passion that was both a plea and a rebuke. "I want her to stay with me." "What's so special about her?" Arfi sneered with mock surprise. "She's only a whore." "And don't call her a whore." The girl shrugged impassively after a few more seconds and ambled toward the door. Nately bounded forward wretchedly to hold it open. He wandered back in a heartbroken daze, his sensitive face eloquent with grief. "Don't worry about it," Yossarian counseled him as kindly as he could. "You'll probably be able to find her again. We know where all the whores hang out." "Please don't call her that," Nately begged, looking as though he might cry. "I'm sorry," murmured Yossarian. Arfi thundered jovially, "There are hundreds of whores just as good crawling all over the streets. That one wasn't even pretty." He chuckled mellifluously with resonant disdain and authority. "Why, you rushed forward to open that door as though you were in love with her." "I think I am in love with her," Nately confessed in a shamed, far-off voice. Arfi wrinkled his chubby round rosy forehead in comic disbelief. "Ho, ho, ho, ho." He laughed, patting the expansive forest green sides of his officer's tunic prosperously. "That's rich. You in love with her? That's really rich." Arfi had a date that same afternoon with a Red Cross girl from Smith whose father owned an important milk of magnesia plant. Now, that's the kind of girl you ought to be associating with, and not with common sluts like that one. Why, she didn't even look clean. "I don't care," Nately shouted desperately. "And I wish you'd shut up, I don't even want to talk about it with you." "Arfi, shut up," said Yossarian. "Ho, ho, ho, ho." Arfi continued. "I just can't imagine what your father and mother would say if they knew you were running around with filthy trollops like that one. Your father is a very distinguished man, you know." "I'm not going to tell him," Nately declared with determination. "I'm not going to say a word about her to him or mother until after we're married." "Married?" Arfi's indulgent merriment swelled tremendously. "Ho, ho, 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 ho. Now you're really talking stupid. Why, you're not even old enough to know what true love is." Arfi was an authority on the subject of true love because he had already fallen truly in love with Nately's father and with the prospect of working for him after the war in some executive capacity as a reward for befriending Nately. Arfi was a lead navigator who had never been able to find himself since leaving college. He was a genial, magnanimous lead navigator who could always forgive the other men in the squadron for denouncing him furiously each time he got lost on a combat mission and led them over concentrations of anti-aircraft fire. He got lost on the streets of Rome that same afternoon and never did find the eligible Red Cross girl from Smith with the important milk of magnesia plant. He got lost on the mission to Ferrara the day Kraft was shot down and killed, and he got lost again on the weekly milk run to Parma and tried to lead the planes out to sea over the city of Leghorn after Yossarian had dropped his bombs on the undefended inland target and settled back against his thick wall of armor plate with his eyes closed and a fragrant cigarette in his fingertips. Suddenly there was flak, and all at once Mquat was shrieking over the intercom, "Flak! Flak! Where the hell are we? What the hell's going on?" Yossarian flipped his eyes open in alarm and saw the totally unexpected bulging black puffs of flak crashing down in toward them from high up and Arfi's complacent melon-round tiny-eyed face gazing out at the approaching cannon bursts with affable bemusement. Yossarian was flabbergasted. His leg went abruptly to sleep. Mquat had started to climb and was yelping over the intercom for instructions. Yossarian sprang forward to see where they were and remained in the same place. He was unable to move. Then he realized he was sopping wet. He looked down at his crotch with a sinking, sick sensation. A wild crimson blot was crawling upward rapidly along his shirt front like an enormous sea monster rising to devour him. He was hit. Separate trickles of blood spilled to a puddle on the floor through one saturated trouser leg like countless unstoppable swarms of wriggling red worms. His heart stopped. A second solid jolt struck the plane. Yossarian shuddered with revulsion at the queer sight of his wound and screamed at Arfi for help. "I lost my balls. Arfi, I lost my balls." Arfi didn't hear, and Yossarian bent forward and tugged at his arm. "Arfi, help me," he pleaded, almost weeping. "I'm hit. I'm hit." Arfi turned slowly with a bland, quizzical grin. "What? I'm hit, Arfi. Help me." Arfi grinned again and shrugged amiably. "I can't hear you," he said. "Can't you see me?" Yossarian cried incredulously, and he pointed to the deepening pool of blood he felt splashing down all around him and spreading out underneath. "I'm wounded. Help me, for God's sake. Arfi, help me." "I still can't hear you," Arfi complained tolerantly, cupping his pudgy hand behind the blanched corolla of his ear. "What did you say?" Yossarian answered in a collapsing voice, weary suddenly of shouting so much, of the whole frustrating, exasperating, ridiculous situation. He was dying, and no one took notice. "Never mind." "What?" Arfi shouted. "I said I lost my balls. Can't you hear me? I'm wounded in the groin." "I still can't hear you," Axfi chided. "I said never mind." Yossarian screamed with a trapped feeling of terror and began to shiver, feeling very cold suddenly and very weak. Arfi shook his head regretfully again and lowered his obscene, lactosant tear almost directly into Yossarian's face. "You'll just have to speak up, my friend. You'll just have to speak up. Leave me alone, you bastard. You dumb, insensitive bastard, leave me alone." Yossarian sobbed. He wanted to pummel Arfi, but lacked the strength to lift his arms. He decided to sleep instead and keeled over sideways into a dead faint. He was wounded in the thigh, and when he recovered consciousness he found Mquat on both knees taking care of him. He was relieved, even though he still saw Arfi's bloated cherub's face hanging down over Mquat's shoulder with placid interest. Yossarian smiled feebly at Mquat, feeling ill, and asked, "Who's minding the store?" Mquat gave no sign that he heard. With growing horror, Yossarian gathered in breath and repeated the words as loudly as he could. Mquat looked up. "Christ, I'm glad you're still alive," he exclaimed, heaving an enormous sigh. The good-humored, friendly crinkles about his eyes were white with tension and oily with grime as he kept unrolling an interminable bandage around the bulky cotton compress Yossarian felt strapped burdensomely to the inside of one thigh. "Nately's at the controls. The poor kid almost started bawling when he heard you were hit. He still thinks you're dead. They knocked open an artery for you, but I think I've got it stopped. I gave you some morphine. Give me some more. It might be too soon. I'll give you some more when it starts to hurt. It hurts now." "Oh, well, what the hell," said Mquat and injected another syringe of morphine into Yossarian's arm. "When you tell Nately I'm all right," said Yossarian to Mquat, and lost consciousness again as everything went fuzzy behind a film of strawberry strained gelatin and a great baritone buzz swallowed him in sound. He came to in the ambulance and smiled encouragement at Doc Danika's weevil-like, glum and overshadowed countenance for the dizzy second or two he had before everything went rose-petal pink again and then turned really black and unfathomably still. Yossarian woke up in the hospital and went to sleep. When he woke up in the hospital again, the smell of ether was gone and Dunbar was lying in pajamas in the bed across the aisle maintaining that he was not Dunbar but a fortiori. Yossarian thought he was cracked. He curled his lip skeptically at Dunbar's bit of news and slept on it fitfully for a day or two, then woke up while the nurses were elsewhere and eased himself out of bed to see for himself. The floor swayed like the floating raft at the beach, and the stitches on the inside of his thigh bit into his flesh like fine sets of fish teeth as he limped across the aisle to peruse the name on the temperature card on the foot of Dunbar's bed. But sure enough, Dunbar was right. He was not Dunbar anymore but Second Lieutenant Anthony F. Forciore. What the hell's going on? A Forciore got out of bed and motioned to Yossarian to follow. Grasping for support at anything he could reach, Yossarian limped along after him into the corridor and down the adjacent ward to a bed containing a harried young man with pimples and a receding chin. The harried young man rose on one elbow with alacrity as they approached. A Forciore jerked his thumb over his shoulder and said, "Screw." The harried young man jumped out of bed and ran away. A Forciore climbed into the bed and became Dunbar again. That was a Forciore, Dunbar explained. They didn't have an empty bed in your ward, so I pulled my rank and chased him back here into mine. It's a pretty satisfying experience pulling rank. You ought to try it sometime. You ought to try it right now, in fact, because you look like you're going to fall down. Yossarian felt like he was going to fall down. He turned to the lantern-jawed, leather-faced middle-aged man lying in the bed next to Dunbar's, jerked his thumb over his shoulder and said, "Screw." The middle-aged man stiffened fiercely and glared. "He's a major," Dunbar explained. "Why don't you aim a little lower and try becoming Warrant Officer Homer Lumley for a while? Then you can have a father in the state legislature and a sister who's engaged to a champion skier. Just tell him you're a captain." Yossarian turned to the startled patient Dunbar had indicated. "I'm a captain," he said, jerking his thumb over his shoulder. "Screw." The startled patient jumped down to the floor at Yossarian's command and ran away. Yossarian climbed up into his bed and became Warrant Officer Homer Lumley, who felt like vomiting and was covered suddenly with a clammy sweat. He slept for an hour and wanted to be Yossarian again. It did not mean so much to have a father in the state legislature and a sister who was engaged to a champion skier. Dunbar led the way back to Yossarian's ward, where he thumbed a Forciore out of bed to become Dunbar again for a while. There was no sign of Warrant Officer Homer Lumley. Nurse Kramer was there, though, and sizzled with sanctimonious anger like a damp firecracker. She ordered Yossarian to get right back into his bed and blocked his path so he couldn't comply. Her pretty face was more repulsive than ever. Nurse Kramer was a good-hearted, sentimental creature who rejoiced unselfishly at news of weddings, engagements, births and anniversaries even though she was unacquainted with any of the people involved. "Are you crazy?" she scolded virtuously, shaking an indignant finger in front of his eyes. "I suppose you just don't care if you kill yourself, do you?" "It's myself," he reminded her. "I suppose you just don't care if you lose your leg, do you?" "It's my leg." "It certainly is not your leg," Nurse Kramer retorted. "That leg belongs to the U.S. government. It's no different than a gear or a bedpan. The Army has invested a lot of money to make you an airplane pilot, and you've no right to disobey the doctor's orders." Yossarian was not sure he liked being invested in. Nurse Kramer was still standing directly in front of him so that he could not pass. His head was aching. Nurse Kramer shouted at him some question he could not understand. He jerked his thumb over his shoulder and said, "Screw." Nurse Kramer cracked him in the face so hard she almost knocked him down. Yossarian drew back his fist to punch her in the jaw just as his leg buckled and he began to fall. Nurse Duckett strode up in time to catch him. She addressed them both firmly. "Just what's going on here?" "He won't get back into his bed," Nurse Kramer reported zealously in an injured tone. "Sue-Ann, he said something absolutely horrible to me. Oh, I can't even make myself repeat it. She called me a gear," Yossarian muttered. Nurse Duckett was not sympathetic. "Will you get back into bed," she said, "or must I take you by your ear and put you there?" "Take me by my ear and put me there," Yossarian dared her. Nurse Duckett took him by his ear and put him back in bed. 27 Nurse Duckett. Nurse Sue-Ann Duckett was a tall, spare, mature, straight-backed woman with a prominent, well-rounded ass, small breasts and angular aesthetic New England features that came equally close to being very lovely and very plain. Her skin was white and pink, her eyes small, her nose and chin slender and sharp. She was able, prompt, strict and intelligent. She welcomed responsibility and kept her head in every crisis. She was adult and self-reliant, and there was nothing she needed from anyone. Yossarian took pity and decided to help her. Next morning while she was standing bent over smoothing the sheets at the foot of his bed, he slipped his hands stealthily into the narrow space between her knees and, all at once, brought it up swiftly under her dress as far as it would go. Nurse Duckett shrieked and jumped into the air a mile, but it wasn't high enough, and she squirmed and vaulted and seesawed back and forth on her divine fulcrum for almost a full 15 seconds before she wiggled free finally and retreated frantically into the aisle with an ashen, trembling face. She backed away too far, and Dunbar, who had watched from the beginning, sprang forward on his bed without warning and flung both arms around her bosom from behind. Nurse Duckett let out another scream and twisted away, fleeing far enough from Dunbar for Yossarian to lunge forward and grab her by the snatch again. Nurse Duckett bounced out across the aisle once more like a ping-pong ball with legs. Dunbar was waiting vigilantly, ready to pounce. She remembered him just in time and leaped aside. Dunbar missed completely and sailed by her over the bed to the floor, landing on his skull with a soggy, crunching thud that knocked him cold. He woke up on the floor with a bleeding nose and exactly the same distressful head symptoms he had been feigning all along. The ward was in a chaotic uproar. Nurse Duckett was in tears, and Yossarian was consoling her apologetically as he sat beside her on the edge of a bed. The commanding colonel was wroth and shouting at Yossarian that he would not permit his patients to take indecent liberties with his nurses. "What do you want from him?" Dunbar asked plaintively from the floor, wincing at the vibrating pains in his temples that his voice set up. "He didn't do anything. I'm talking about you." The thin, dignified colonel bellowed as loudly as he could. "You are going to be punished for what you did. What do you want from him?" Yossarian called out. "All he did was fall on his head. And I'm talking about you too," the colonel declared, whirling to rage at Yossarian. "You are going to be good and sorry you grabbed Nurse Duckett by the bosom." "I didn't grab Nurse Duckett by the bosom," said Yossarian. "I grabbed her by the bosom," said Dunbar. "Are you both crazy?" the doctor cried shrilly, backing away in paling confusion. "Yes, he really is crazy, Doc," Dunbar assured him. "Every night he dreams he's holding a live fish in his hands." The doctor stopped in his tracks with a look of elegant amazement and distaste, and the ward grew still. "He does what?" he demanded. "He dreams he's holding a live fish in his hand." "What kind of fish?" the doctor inquired sternly of Yossarian. "I don't know," Yossarian answered. "I can't tell one kind of fish from another." "In which hand do you hold them?" "It varies," answered Yossarian. "It varies with the fish," Dunbar added helpfully. The colonel turned and stared down at Dunbar suspiciously with a narrow squint. "Yes? And how come you seem to know so much about it?" "I'm in the dream," Dunbar answered without cracking a smile. The colonel's face flushed with embarrassment. He glared at them both with cold, unforgiving resentment. "Get up off the floor and into your bed," he directed Dunbar through thin lips. "And I don't want to hear another word about this dream from either one of you. I've got a man on my staff to listen to disgusting bilge like this." "Just why do you think?" carefully inquired Major Sanderson, the soft and thick-set smiling staff psychiatrist to whom the colonel had ordered Yossarian sent, "that Colonel Farage find your dream disgusting?" Yossarian replied respectfully. "I suppose it's either some quality in the dream or some quality in Colonel Farage." "That's very well put," applauded Major Sanderson, who wore squeaking GI shoes and had charcoal black hair that stood up almost straight. "For some reason," he confided, "Colonel Farage has always reminded me of a seagull. He doesn't put much faith in psychiatry, you know. You don't like seagulls, do you?" inquired Yossarian. No, not very much, admitted Major Sanderson with a sharp, nervous laugh and pulled at his pendulous second chin lovingly as though it were a long goatee. I think your dream is charming, and I hope it recurs frequently so that we can continue discussing it. Would you like a cigarette? He smiled when Yossarian declined. Just why do you think, he asked knowingly, that you have such a strong aversion to accepting a cigarette from me? I put one out a second ago. It's still smoldering in your ashtray. Major Sanderson chuckled. That's a very ingenious explanation. But I suppose we'll soon discover the true reason. He tied a sloppy double bow in his open shoelace and then transferred a lined yellow pad from his desk to his lap. This fish you dream about. Let's talk about that. It's always the same fish, isn't it? I don't know, Yossarian replied. I have trouble recognizing fish. What does the fish remind you of? Other fish. And what do other fish remind you of? Other fish. Major Sanderson sat back disappointedly. Do you like fish? Not especially. Just why do you think you have such a morbid aversion to fish? Asked Major Sanderson triumphantly. They are too bland, Yossarian answered. And too bony. Major Sanderson nodded understandingly, with a smile that was agreeable and insincere. That's a very interesting explanation. But we'll soon discover the true reason, I suppose. Do you like this particular fish? The one you're holding in your hand? I have no feelings about it either way. Do you dislike the fish? Do you have any hostile or aggressive emotions toward it? No, not at all. In fact, I rather like the fish. Then you do like the fish? Oh, no. I have no feelings toward it either way. But you just said you liked it. And now you say you have no feelings toward it either way. I've just caught you in a contradiction. Don't you see? Yes, sir. I suppose you have caught me in a contradiction. Major Sanderson proudly lettered contradiction on his pad with his thick black pencil. Just why do you think, he resumed when he had finished, looking up, that you made those two statements expressing contradictory emotional responses to the fish? I suppose I have an ambivalent attitude toward it. Major Sanderson sprang up with joy when he heard the words ambivalent attitude. You do understand? He exclaimed, wringing his hands together ecstatically. Oh, you can't imagine how lonely it's been for me, talking day after day to patients who haven't the slightest knowledge of psychiatry, trying to cure people who have no real interest in me or my work. It's given me such a terrible feeling of inadequacy. A shadow of anxiety crossed his face. I can't seem to shake it. Really? Asked Yossarian, wondering what else to say. Why do you blame yourself for gaps in the education of others? It's silly, I know, Major Sanderson replied uneasily with a giddy, involuntary laugh. But I've always depended very heavily on the good opinion of others. I reached puberty a bit later than all the other boys my age, you see, and it's given me well, all sorts of problems. I just know I'm going to enjoy discussing them with you. I'm so eager to begin that I'm almost reluctant to digress now to your problem, but I'm afraid I must. Colonel Farage would be cross if he knew we were spending all our time on me. I'd like to show you some ink blots now to FMD out what certain shapes and colors remind you of.